Rise Above 2020 is happy to introduce Christa Manning, Director of Technology and Innovation at UKG, where she leads the AI Vision Strategy and Xander AI Services Portfolio Management for the UKG Pro Enterprise Solution. She is a research-driven strategist focusing on helping entities understand and use the latest technologies to support workforce contribution and connection. Let's welcome Christa here to present on the topic From Transactional to Transcendent, Transformative HR Tech.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that nice, slick opening. It's great to have such a well-run virtual event in these days. And I won't spend too much more time on the context of the environment that we're in, right? We all know we are in unprecedented times, but to some extent, it's an opportunity. We can see so many silver linings in what we have in front of us in terms of what HR technology and technology that support the workforce can do. Now, as you heard in my intro, and I hope many of you we've come across paths in the real world over the last couple decades of my career in the industry as an analyst. But increasingly, as I was evaluating all the different HR technologies and thinking about HR implementation technology challenges, I really started to hone in on the simplicity of having an employee-facing technology strategy. And it comes down to these three principles, which I've carried over from my work as an analyst in terms of what I talk to individuals buying solutions and implementing solutions, to now how I think about developing solutions and delivering them to customers and hoping to influence the marketplace. And the three simple ideas are connectivity, productivity, and humanity. What can HR and employee worker-facing technologies do to really have an impact on our organizations, on our individual lives, and on our society? And I think that these principles I will share with you today hopefully resonate with what people are experiencing and what they are looking for and really driving for in their own HR technology solution strategies and projects. So the first one, connectivity. The key question here is, how can technology help us access what we need and want from work? And I think of this as really, we have more and more resources and relationships that people need to be successful on the job and off. And the idea is that HR technology should connect people and serve as that connectivity platform. And a little bit of context of how this is an inevitable, I would say, evolution of where we have been as an industry and as enterprise technology. Certainly, technology came around to be providing a system of record. As organizations grew and had so much more data and compliance challenges, they needed to collect everything in one place. And then certainly we wanted to automate things to be more efficient. And then as the consumer technology world really surpassed what was going on in enterprise technology in terms of user expectations, we wanted to have systems that people like to use. They wanted to actually embrace them and do employee self-service and manager self-service. And that really evolved into, okay, well, what is the complete employee experience? It's not just the digital tools you give them, but it's also the service and support that you wrap around them. And I think that's table stakes today. Really, that's really what HR technology must do seamlessly and consistently in order to come to the party. But moving ahead, the table stakes have been raised. We certainly are looking at how we can make people smarter and faster at work to really make better decisions and focus on the right work. And I say that, this is incredibly crucial for us to get equity in the workplace so that everybody, gets the right work done in the right ways and can go back to the things that are meaningful to them to advance their career and to enjoy their personal lives. But more and more, we're going to have this idea of connection, how we can use technology to better understand ourselves and those around us and what we need to be successful if we may not even have visibility down the line into what career paths might be available to us or what resources have been successful in supporting our peers or those like us. And so that's really how we're thinking about, you go from transaction to transcendent, and really sets the stage for the theme of the session today. And if you look at the supporting data around why this makes sense and why this is somewhat inevitable, I bet a lot of people on the call today can identify with this statistic, in that too much of what we have put out there, the digital tools, the electronic access to information, has been disconnected. And we haven't really given people good employee experience to access all the information in the right ways at the right time that makes sense to them. And we really want to have HR people focusing on the new things they can do to coach managers to be better managers, to sit with the executives and strategize on how the workforce supports business outcomes. But there are digital tools that have come to the forefront, particularly in this time as people are remote, that can do a lot of that for us, right? So simply having a well-implemented knowledge base that employees can access, can find, can give HR administrators and people time back to do a lot of this innovative stuff. And that's this research out of Gartner doesn't even take into account when you start to layer on natural language interfaces, which we'll talk about in a few moments, to really help people find what they need more quickly so they can go back to doing the meaningful activities at work and at home, but then also to give HR administrators back that time. And I like to quote my good colleague and friend from the industry, Stacey Harris, who just put out her most recent report under her new organization, Sapient Insights, but that just simply accessing digital information really is no longer enough. It is about connecting people to the relationships, and it could be with HR, really listening and understanding what the challenges are, outside of all the tasks of just simply finding information, the real hard solutions about managing conflict or coaching people and gaining people's better performance and motivating individuals. And I think this is where you have to think beyond that connectivity to simple information and knowledge to really understanding organizational networks and how we interact with each other and provide resources and connections to mentors and others who have similar careers to really guide us in making better decisions about our work lives. And simply put, the reality is that these tools and technologies are available to us in the marketplace today to do more human connection, ironically, through technologies like artificial intelligence and natural language processing. So when you think about it, employee self-service was brought to market to help people do a lot of the things they wanted to do and didn't want to have to wait in line or wait in a queue or on the phone to get answers, right? And so more and more we can help people have access to the information I just mentioned. But we can start to do more things and start to make suggestions by looking at how people have accessed data in the past or what people have done with different sets of data or documents, and start to suggest how to do that and make nudges. And then finally, we can actually look at business rules and being more sophisticated around predictions to make suggestions and nudges for people to take action or to authorize actions to be taken on part of the system. And I think that is things that, like asking for paid time off or approving timesheets, if it falls within reasonable business rules and you can do audits using artificial intelligence, then we really free the manager's times up to have more important discussions around strategy, business operations, managing people, coaching people, really helping them find out what's meaningful in the workplace for them to move on and grow and develop. So the second theme today is around that idea of productivity. How can we actually give people back time to do the most important things that really drive business outcomes and personal outcomes? And more importantly, I think, as I mentioned earlier, is this idea of equity on a level playing field. Can we help people get the right work done and measure the right work that's being done so that people are advancing and finding success? And sadly, and I take responsibility for this, I joke that as a former analyst, when you looked at all the different technologies that are out there and all the innovations, oftentimes it was, look at this new best of breed tool, look at that new app. But unfortunately, that has been problematic, and many economists have hypothesis that too much technology has made our productivity plateau over the last decade. We had a huge wave with enterprise software, with that first wave of automation, but we haven't necessarily seen that productivity of late. And so we have to think more about how do we give people the right technology, maybe smaller technology in more incremental bits or through nudges and suggestions, so that we can get them more focused on the right meaningful work that drives outputs in the organization and in our businesses. So we've seen that we've had plateaus in productivities. Workers are reporting this. And we're also hearing from workers that the technology that they're being given isn't necessarily as effective to get them focused on the right work, right? And if your company is asking you to do employee self-service in lots of different disparate applications, that's going to take time away from, again, the knowledge work or the customer-facing work or the innovation work that we really want our people to be focused on. Because as we have more automation and more artificial intelligence, the more we have to hone in on what are the uniquely human things that people can do. How do we augment those? How do we augment creativity and problem solving and things like that? And just one more stat, don't want to be too much of a downer, but of late, we have seen a disconnect in terms of what technologies people are being offered and what they think really makes a difference in the workplace. Our point of view is that the employee experience, again, is about the digital tools you give them, but also the surrounding context and how you treat them, whether they're in the digital remote world or as we hopefully get back into the workplace, as we interact with each other to make the best use of our time. And here's where, again, I would say artificial intelligence is going to have a huge role to play, which many might think is ironic. But to some extent, we have so much data, so much information overload today. We actually need to take advantage of automation and AI to recognize patterns and to make suggestions, because people also have a lot of biases when we have too much information or not enough information that has us making maybe sometimes suboptimal decisions. So to kind of illustrate this point, when you think about where we can use AI today to enable productivity and equity, there are tools in the marketplace today that understand natural language. We can understand how people feel, and we can do this at scale, right? We can do much more employee voice listening to really understand what the issues are, what's getting in their way of being productive. And then also use machine learning to see when there are interventions by managers doing coaching or suggesting different initiatives or interactions, what is actually working at scale. And then we can start to do more of that proactive, do it with you or do it for you type activities for HR. Can we start to do nudges and considerations around what might work or what has worked in the past for people like you or teams like yours? And we're doing a lot more now around sophisticated predictions, not just retention or turnover or how people might perform. I think that's, again, table stakes in the industry today, but more around what really matters while people are at work, on the job, interacting with teams, so we can have interactions or initiatives before we get to things like turnover. So in the context of COVID, we're looking at things like employee burnout. The World Health Organization in 2018, I think it was, defined this as actually a disease. It is one of the recognized situations where unmitigated stress in the workplace really results in lack of employee efficacy, real serious business issues. And so we're trying to look at all of the different data points that we have from transactions, certainly, but also through better understanding of workers and what they want and what they need and how they feel, to be able to have really targeted and meaningful interventions so that we can really support people. And again, the more that we can make this proactive and informed by enough data so that we know what works for different populations and what we can audit to make sure that we're not doing things that maybe gave us bias in the workplace in the past, the more that we can actually get people focused on the right work in the right way in a real equitable and fair environment. And again, the more that we can embrace the idea that there are systems out there that interact and connect us with the right resources, push information to us, and suggest things, the more I think we get to what a lot of executives have always wanted to hone in on, which is workforce productivity, but in a much more meaningful and I think sustainable and humanistic way, which is a good segue to the last part of the session today, which, you know, some people might say this is too touchy-feely, but I think to some extent, this has to be the path that we go down to truly tap into what motivates people and will give people the confidence and the trust that workers, that their employers are trying to support them to be more productive, to make them successful, to give them the resources and relationships to be successful. And I think coming out of this environment, coming out of COVID, we've looked into what we're calling this idea of sort of life-work synergy. People are now having to acknowledge that they have personal lives and that they can bring their authentic self to work. And the more that employees feel like this, the more that they can share and be recognized as an individual human, the more that they're willing to share themselves and their contributions at work. So a powerful statistic that when people could share and feel like their manager cared about them and listened to them, the more that they were able to engage in the workplace and create meaningful contribution. Generationally, this is potentially going to be table stakes as well. So there's a lot of discussion around the millennials being the biggest labor force now in the workplace. A lot of the millennials are reaching, family age or having to consider balancing work and family and personal aspirations or interests. I like to say this applies to every generation. It just depends on, what demographic is trendy at the moment. But the more that we are able to meet people where they are and recognize them as individual human beings that have a disparate set of interests and ambitions, the more that we will be able to support them and make them productive and engaged in the workplace. And I think, again, I don't want to continuously come back to artificial intelligence, although that is certainly my area of expertise and passion, but we are able now to personalize at scale because we can say, we know this about these populations and how they've behaved, because we can look at data and patterns of data, not only across the breadth of a company, but also the breadth of an industry, as all more data is in the cloud and you can do benchmarks and understand how different workers are being supported or not across different organizations. And then certainly the longer that you are working with data in the cloud over a history of time, the more rich those AI algorithms can be to predict patterns and to make recommendations and suggestions. And so we're able to actually meet people where they are and really have new interventions that are personalized for individuals and address some of these real serious issues that we're seeing, like burnout in our environment, even more so today in the current COVID pandemic. One really interesting thing that I wanted to share that I think brings home this idea of transaction to transcendence. So the more that we can give people time back to focus on their uniquely human contributions, that one-on-one connection and listening and identifying how to coach people and work through conflict and come up with new ideas, the more we're actually helping to stop things like burnout. So this was a study that was done and published in Harvard Business Review a little earlier this year about how much time people were spending in meetings and collaborating and working overall as the pandemic took hold, and many organizations had to put people remote. Knowledge workers that were lucky enough to be able to go to remote, what were they spending their time on? And here you can see that the more that people spent in one-on-one manager time in meaningful conversations, they actually were able to focus on the right work, and not only the right work, but less work, right? And there's lots of scientific research going on right now around the challenges around mental health, the propensity to have more burnout because there aren't good boundaries between when people are working and how they're working across all different industries. And so here, again, if we can think about how do we make people have the right information, they're focusing on the right work, and then empowering the people, the managers, to be better managers and have better conversations and coach people, we're actually going to be solving for a lot of the problems that we've faced traditionally around productivity and information overload, as well as real serious societal issues like chronic stress and burnout. And one more plug for automation. There's so much that we can be doing to execute transactions and to automate processes. That's all good, and HR systems should be doing. But the most important thing is to redirect people's time, individual workers on their own career ambitions or the resources they need to continuously learn, adapt to change, as well as managers on how to be better managers. We all know that workers don't leave companies, they leave bad managers. And if that is the one thing that HR probably, as they free their time up from asking, redundant questions, it should be on making managers better managers, as well as holding managers accountable to be better managers, and working with executives to support people and support managers with the right coaching and development as well, right? I was on an earlier panel and had a really great session with some industry colleagues. And I like to say we're all frontline workers, right? We're all hourly workers. We may not get paid overtime, but we all want to focus on the right work and how to be successful doing it, and take away all the administration and all the things that can be automated, because that's where we're really going to spend our time and when we're going to have the most personal and professional return on our time investment. So to really drive this point home, we do think that we have to absolutely shift from transactional to transformational in the employer-employee relationship. So how can we be thinking along those lines of what our systems really do? And to some extent, we don't even really like to say human capital management anymore. Human capital is an alienating kind of abstract economist term. And management is, no one really wants to be managed, right? We really want to be coached and encouraged and supported on the job and off the job. And so I was an English major. A lot of times I joke that I love alliteration, and I spend a lot of time looking at language and how people think. We think that the language has to change, right? And we already have seen so many organizations talk about their chief people officer or their chief culture officer. And we think that we're going to see shifts from employee performance to employee contribution and impact. And I've already mentioned this idea of Lifework synergy, or how do we help people connect to what's most meaningful to them wherever they are in their career or wherever they are in the world. Because at the end of the day, as more automation happens and more digitization happens, which was really, really pushed forward by the remote nature of the pandemic, if HR isn't focused on making managers better managers, we're focused on helping everybody adapt to change and use the tools that are available to us to really be able to continuously learn and be encouraged and coached to grow and adapt to the ongoing environment, positive or negative. And I like to kind of end this as this is somewhat a virtuous cycle, right? If you help people connect to the resources and the relationships they need to be successful, that will make them more productive. And that will tap into the real work that they find meaningful to your organization, building on their strengths. We've heard a lot of social science that that's really how people grow and are able to contribute. And that really taps into what they want out of work, beyond the basic remuneration and rewards that help us support ourselves and our families and provide, but also to feel like you're not just a cog in the wheel. And I love to quote Brene Brown, the sociologist, that this is a virtuous cycle because then you feel heard. If you are able to do the work that you want and you're given the tools that you need and you're able to be a part of something bigger than yourself because you're you're with an organization that respects your humanity and your need to grow and develop, this is really the mission and the strategy of HR and workforce-facing technologies today. So, as I said, I hope that everybody will connect with me and continue to really invest in yourselves in this type of educational opportunities. They can be harder as we are in such a challenging situation with not a lot of certainty on when it will end. I have to say that doing virtual events have gotten a lot cooler. Before, you weren't sure if people were paying attention. And now I think this event for sure was so well produced. It really made me feel like I was on, a global broadcast television presentation, right? Like, we have to take them seriously and continue to invest in ourselves and network and learn, because that is ultimately what's going to help all of us thrive in our personal and professional lives. So I will turn to the questions that are coming in on the chat and see if I've been able to answer any of these with my talk track. I love this one. What can be done to reduce the time spent on mails? I'm thinking this is emails. I think there's a lot of analysis right now around how people are spending their time, like that statistic I shared on how people are spending time in meetings and collaborating. People are also looking at how our individuals using their connectivity tools, like mails themselves. I've seen organizations be successful encouraging workers to time box how much time they spend on mail, and different collaboration channels that can be successful. And also setting cultural norms around when people should be on certain communications channels and how. I think is incredibly important. So those are two things I would suggest: time boxing, and then setting up some cultural norms. And then certainly just managing yourself, right? You should be able to skim through what's valuable and what's not, and set up some filters or blockers if you're getting things that aren't as helpful to getting the right work done and spending the right time. How is COVID accelerating HR transformation? I have another presentation that I was doing around the impact of COVID on HR technology, and I don't know if people have seen this, but what was the disruption, or no, what C-level, I'm going to ruin this joke now, but really what C-level executive, drove your digital transformation? And people joke it was actually COVID, because everyone had to go remote and embrace all the digital tools that may have been there, but maybe not well adopted. I think that really is the reality. When people have to use something, when they see the immediate benefit to them, they will. And that's, I think, how COVID accelerated HR transformation, because you had to think about, what is your service delivery model? Is your system accessible remotely? That, I think, has made cloud deployment certainly much more amenable to any executives that were holding back, thinking that there was not value in that type of system or accessibility. So that's what I would say. This overall digital embracing of being remote or being touchless, right? Even in the spheres of work where the frontline workers are out there, the more that we can use digital tools or even voice interaction to not have to touch things, I thought was somewhat of a profound push that I hadn't expected to come so quickly in the world. Another question: should HR be fearful of AI or embrace it for productivity? What suggestions do you have for HR to learn more and remove fears? Clearly, I feel that it's inevitable, or organization will be remiss if they are not embracing AI now, for the reasons that I mentioned. There's too much data, too much digital exhaust of things that we can know, but we cannot process with the human brain. We need to use algorithms today. And we know so much more about how to audit those algorithms, to design them to not be biased, and also to use the power of algorithms and digital technologies to reduce human bias, which I had already touched on. I'm happy to talk to anyone about that, because I've done a lot of research, and we're trying to lead the industry really around bias-free software and fairness in algorithms. I would say definitely, go online, and there's so much being written about it today. Lots of good sources to track. And certainly, I tend to comment on a lot. So if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I'm always trying to point out or retweet and share some of the good sources that I find myself in the industry. Does the 2 of 10 workers that feel HR respects their time factor in employee and the manager? Yes, I believe they do. It is the entire employee world that was in that survey. The comment is thinking that managers may find HR technology even more cumbersome. That, I think that absolutely is true. So I would put the managers and employees in that statistic for sure. Well, looking at the time, I know that we're supposed to wrap it up at the top of the hour. I will be in the speakers lounge. And again, I welcome people to reach out and connect and continue the conversation. These are all important things that we should be discussing and making sure that people are educated on and aware of, in order for us to make the right decisions, to make these investments, and really get to that transcendence that is possible, somewhat, I would say, inevitable, and our responsibility to embrace as workforce facing technology developers, deliverers, and consumers. So with that, I will hand it back to my friends at Neeyamo.